Ready to go?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to do the watercolor for you, obviously. I'm painting on Dick Blick paper. They have their own paper now. It's pretty good. And I bought a block of it. I've been using it the last few months. Works out pretty well.
Is that 140 cold press?
140 cold press. Yep. Yep. And what I plan to do today is a little Caribbean scene here. Nothing too complex, because I want to take my time with it, and if you have questions while I'm doing it, I'd be glad to answer. I've got a little L-shaped building here, a little stone wall, some vegetation, whatever. The rest I left empty, but I do have plans for that. I'm going to be putting in a distant island or a piece of the island back there and some water and whatever. But for now, I'm just going to concentrate on getting the foreground done. Whenever I do a painting or lay out a painting, I start from the things that are closest to me and then work my way back. Anything that's in front of something else tends to be more important because it's in front of it. So that's kind of the way I think about things. So here, in this case, we've got this big area of green here, and got some tropical leaves coming down. They're kind of in front of the building, so I'm going to start by putting those in first. So I'm going to take some of my green here. I use a very, very bright green. It's a bright yellow green here. And I use that because you can always take that green and make it less garish just by simply putting a little something over it, usually a little red of some sort. In case you want a nice bright area, you've got it. So this is cadmium green pale, actually. It's a Holbein color, and this is actually they make it in watercolor and in gouache. This is actually the gouache, but because I use a lot of water with it, it's very transparent, just like the watercolor. The watercolor doesn't seem to have enough body to it for me, anyway. So that's why I use the gouache part. And that's the only gouache that I have in here, and it's, as you can see, it's pretty transparent. Now, I have some more vegetation down here, which I want to do in a little different greens, so they're not all the same. So I'm going to take a little of this gold ochre here and just smoosh this in. When I do a watercolor, what I do is I tend to put in all my light values, the values that occur where the sun is hitting the objects in full force, where it's the strongest. I usually paint in the entire object, like this little area of green. And then once it's semi-dry, or sometimes when it's still wet, I'll go in and I'll put my secondary values in. Now I have some subtropical leaves hanging down here. Those I'm going to make a little bit darker, so I'm going to take the light green and I'm going to mix it with a dark green that I have, which is called perline green. It's a pretty dead green. It doesn't have a lot of oomph to it, but it's good to darken your green, and it's good when you want some real dark greens, and it'll do the trick. Now I'm just using my brush to I don't know what kind of leaves these are. You know, I'm just making them up. One thing about tropical plants, I enjoy painting them because they're so I don't know how you describe it. They just seem to explode, like all the ends, and it's fun to use the brush that way. Just using the brush to make these weird-looking shapes. So that should be enough for that. A little bit more up here, maybe. Here we go. Okay, that's pretty easy. And then we have a little grass down at the bottom too. So I'm going to put some grass in there. Let's get a little yellow in with that. Even though I know some of these areas are going to wind up being quite a bit darker later on, I always start by putting the lighter value in first. And then you've got a consistent color underneath, so you're not dealing with just white paper. Okay, that should do that. And I'm just going to use the hair. This is the only chance I ever get to use this. So. Back when I first met Ann, she was referring to it before I still had hair, but now I don't. So anyway, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the secondary value on, even though I haven't done anything with the building yet, or I haven't. I'm going to make it a white building with a sort of a tile roof. Oh, one more thing I want to do: put a little tone on the walkway here. So I'm just take a little raw umber here, and just put a little tone on that.
Steve, when you're mixing with your wash,
Yeah.
can you use any kind of watercolor, either opaque or transparent?
Yeah, they
So you
mix.
use opaque watercolor with wash?
They mix interchangeably.
Okay.
I do a lot of paintings in gouache now that I do for sale. Like the one that's in the frame there of the Florida scene.
Yeah.
That's all done in gouache, and it's an acrylic-based gouache. So when it dries to a hard surface. You can't lift it up like you can normal regular gouache. Regular gouache is simply watercolor that has chalk mixed in with it and a couple other ingredients, which makes it opaque. But even if you're using regular gouache, if you thin it out with a lot of water, it is basically transparent. If you paint it, full force without a lot of water, then it becomes opaque. But they intermix very, very nicely.
Can you tell us about the brush you're using?
Yeah, this is I started using these a few months ago. I just picked it up by accident, and I love them. They're made by Princeton. It's called a Velvet Touch, and it's called a long round, not just a round, a long round. If you can see the point on that. I mean, it's almost like you could do like Chinese letters with it. It's really amazing. Especially with watercolor, which is a very fluid medium, it's nice to have that nice little point. You can make little lines with it, or if you press down, you've got a lot more coverage. And I love these. They come in various sizes. This is about the biggest one. I have a couple of smaller ones too.
Do you have a favorite brand of gouache?
Well, the gouache that I use for my for like that Florida painting, it's made by Holbein. It's called Acryla. It's Holbein's the company, and it's called Acryla. They have it at Dick Blick. They have it everywhere, really. Cheap Joe's has it, all that. It's nice to work. They got great colors. Some of the colors, the greens, I don't care for their greens. So for their greens, I use like Winsor Newton gouache, but the rest of it I use the Holbein. Okay, now I'm going to have the sun coming from the left. So it's going to hit this surface of the house, this surface, this will be in shadow. So because the sun's coming from the left, what I'm going to do now is take some darker value and start to put the secondary value on the greenery here. Now this is going to be the value that occurs where the light is not hitting the object full force. So of course down at the bottom that would occur. I try to think of the object as being three-dimensional. By doing that, what I'm doing is, with watercolor you have to kind of paint backwards. You put your lights on first, then you put your darks on. But when you're putting your darks on, you have to think about what shapes you're leaving in the light. That's where everybody seems to get a little bit of a problem, at least in the beginning. You have a tendency, when you're putting the darks on, to just think about the darks that you're putting in. But what you're doing by putting the darks in, you're shaping the lights. So that's it for now for that. I'll probably go back and do a little more later. But now this area of vegetation is growing over, the wall is kind of falling down here. Again, I'm going to start at the area that would get the least amount of light, which would be the right side and the bottom. Because I'm thinking of the object again three-dimensionally. I'm thinking of it being rounded this way, so most of the light's going to hit it on the top, and then there's going to be some areas that overhang a little bit or up a little higher, like here, and they're going to throw a little dark down on the area next to it. And what I like to do is I just like to get a feeling of light and shadow. I don't go too far with it, because once you put a dark down, it's hard to get it back with watercolor. And if you go too far too fast, you may wind up with too many darks. You may want to put lights in there later, and it's kind of tough. So I go a little at a time. So now I've got a feeling of where the sunlight's coming from. This kind of reminds me of what I'm doing by putting those little bit of darker areas in. It just cements in my mind that the light is coming from there. So now what I want to do is I want to put my secondary value on the building. And because the building is going to be white, it's going to be the white paper, that's going to be the light value. So now the secondary value is going to be the shadow. And I like to make shadows by using ultramarine blue and a color that is a cheap Joe's color. It's one of his American Journey colors, and it's called raw Umber Violet. And it's like a reddish, almost like a purplish, you can see it here. And it gives you kind of a nice, almost a purpley kind of a shadow. And depending on how much water you mix with it, you can get some real nice dark darks, or you can get some real nice, very light areas too. So what I'm going to do is first put in the...
For a second, could you please repeat the color from American Journey?
Yeah, it's raw Umber Violet. And depending on how much blue you mix with it, or how much of the violet you mix with it, you get a bunch of different variations there that are kind of nice. So I'm just going to carefully put in, this is the shadow, of course, that would occur because this wall is standing up against the light there. And now, of course, that's going to be casting a shadow down onto the surface back here. So we're going to have a cast shadow coming down. I'm going to be careful to paint around the light areas of my greenery there. Make sure the shadow continues down straight. And then we're going to we'll have an overhang here where the roof overhangs the front. So that'll cast a shadow down also. I love to do Caribbean scenes with the shadows like this. It's just, you really get a feeling of sunshine. It looks a little dark, but what happens is it's going to dry up hopefully a little lighter. That's what normally happens with watercolor. Now we also have a piece of roof here that has an overhang. So here we're going to put in another shadow from that overhang. Okay. And I think what I'm going to do is just take out a little bit of color with a paper towel, just down here, maybe a little bit here. A little dark. Okay. I'll just spread that out a little bit. Okay, now, what I want to do is this stone wall. In the Caribbean, a lot of times you'll see stone walls, they'll be stuccoed or whatever, but they're usually made out of some sort of local stone, a lot of times out of coral. So they're usually not, unless they're painted white, they're usually just a neutral color. So what I'm going to do is put a little bit of a neutral sort of gray and a little bit of this raw umber on the wall, get a little bit warmer there. I have enough white with the building itself, so that's why I'm toning down the wall. And I'm just putting it on, I'm just kind of dabbing it on and kind of scraping, not using a lot of water. When you do that, you can get a lot of texture, as you see. Okay. Now, while that's drying, I'm going to put some color on the roof. Now the roofs, Caribbean roofs, normally they can be almost any color. They have all sorts of different materials that they make them out of. A lot of the roofs are made out of metal, and these will be sort of a Spanish tile, I guess. Just want to introduce a nice warm orangey color in there, so that's what I'm gonna mix up here. I'm using some Windsor orange and some cadmium yellow, I think that is. And I'm gonna have to turn this a little bit, so I'll put it back. It's kind of hard to do it with the piece the way it was. So let me just get this covered. And again, this is the light value of the roof. And there will be some shadows again. I love throwing shadows. The nice thing about shadows is that it can help to emphasize the area where you want someone to really pay attention. Like if I want you to look in this area here, I would shadow the areas around it. And that's what I'm going to be doing eventually. So there's my base coat on that. And the next thing, I should have a cast shadow now from this big green bush here. Again, sun coming from this direction, so it's going to cast a shadow onto the pavement there, whatever pavement is there. And as you can see, the dark green I put on before has lightened up considerably, so now I'm going to go in with some darker green. This would be my third value. This would be the darkest value now. This would be where the light has a very tough time getting in. That's going to happen usually, I'm going to do it over here too. That'll happen in areas that are already dark. You don't want to put these darks in the sunlight. Okay, as you can see, that's a pretty strong contrast, and again, this will lighten up a bit, so it won't be quite as strong. A lot of times you have to, especially with watercolor, you have to go back and keep darkening things that don't wind up being as dark as you thought they were going to be. Okay, now what I want to do is start putting some shadows here on the wall and on the house from some vegetation that might be out here that we don't see, but we can tell it's there from the shadows. So now I'm going to mix up some more of this, and I'm going to shadow my wall. I'll put a little bit more of the umber in there. And what I'm going to do is break the shadow here and make some, what I hope look like shadows from, vegetation, Caribbean style vegetation. Little shadows under the little pieces there. And of course, we'll have shadow from the wall also on the, on the little pathway there. Now that shadow, of course, is not just going to fall on the wall. It's also going to wind up on the grass. But the grass is the grass in the sunlight is darker than the wall in sunlight, so the shadow on the grass is going to be darker. Where the shadow hits it. And then, of course, the shadow also will wind up on the vegetation here. A little later on, when this dries up more, I'll bring some of those leaves down into the wall. Now I'm going to mix up some of that darker green again, put a little ultramarine in it to get it really dark, and whoop, a little too dark. And I'm going to put in some of the dark areas that are underneath these leaves. And by putting these kind of little slashes in there, they kind of give you that that idea that the vegetation there is sort of islandy, Caribbean kind of stuff. Okay. Alrighty. And we'll just, let me tighten this up a little bit. I want to make a few little adjustments in there. Put a little in here, a little bit here. And we'll get some darks on the, leaves here, on the foliage. Okay, I can always come back to that later too. Okay, as you can see, I'm starting to get a good feel for the sunlight there. Now, I'm going to put a little something on the roof there. I want to get the roof also to talk about, to get the idea across that there's vegetation casting shadows on it. So I'm going to mix up a darker version of that orange. I'll put a little ultramarine in there and a little orange and a little opera. That's another color that I use sometimes. It gives you a nice pinky glow and it makes the shadow a little bit, it gives it a little bit more color within the shadow. So again, I'm going to throw some shadow here. Okay, and I'm going to put a little bit of a dark line underneath the roof there, just to give it a little bit more oomph. And we've got a piece of the roof here that we don't see the top, but we do see the edge. Okay. And now that this, I think, is let me make sure that this is dry here. I don't want to get it too mushy. If you have any questions while I'm doing this, please, yell them out. Be happy to answer. Okay, now back to the ultramarine and Umber Violet. And then we're going to throw some more shadow here on the house. And you can see that the shadow lightened up quite a bit here, so I'm actually going to go over it a little bit. And the shadow also on the wall wound up getting a little bit lighter than I would like, so I'll take care of that. And just want to get that evened out. Take care of some of these little whites that are still popping through here. Okay. Oh, I made a mess. I always do that. I always wind up putting my finger in something. Okay, now I want to do the windows on the house. I need my small brush for that, so I forgot to bring that out. I have a nice old brush. There used to be a round brush that it's got to be 40 years old at least. And all the roundness is gone, so it's actually like a small flat brush, which is nice for windows. And take some of that gold ochre and put it in where the window is going to be in the sunlight. So I'm going to make some 6/6 standard old-fashioned kind of windows, 6 panes, and then 6 panes on the bottom. As you can see, this brush is nice for doing these little panes. Now the bottom sash I always make darker, and it gives you a nice feeling of the window being, having the depth that it would have. Is, you know, the bottom sash is always in a little bit, because if you open a window, it has to slide behind the top sash. So by making the bottom darker, it gives you that impression of it being set further in. Now, I have a window here, but instead of getting into the panes and all, I'm going to make believe that I'm going to put shutters on these windows too after this stuff is dry. But I'm going to make believe the shutters are closed on that window. So I'm going to get a little smaller brush. So I'm going to take some of this nice light blue. This is a blue that I use in lieu of cerulean blue. It's called Horizon Blue, and again, it's another Holbein color, and it has more oomph than the cerulean, so I like to use it. So what I'm going to do is just put that blue in here where the shutters would be over the window. Not going to see a lot of it. And of course, wherever the shadow hits that blue, it's got to go darker, so I'll get to that later when it dries. And, okay. And let's see, I want to put a little bit more shadow here. Underneath the vegetation there on the wall, throw a little shadow there too. It's overhanging the wall. When it gets down here, it's pretty much shadowed the entire wall. And let's take some of these shadows here and bring them out a little bit longer. Okay. Now what I want to do is I wanted to show you what I was talking about before as far as the green here. It's a little bit on the garish side. And what I'm going to do is take a little opera, which is that real pink color. I don't know if you ever run across it. And I'm just going to take a wash of that and put it over it.
I heard they were going to stop making opera. I heard they were going to stop making the opera.
I don't know what I saw some for sale the other day in Dick Blick. Any particular reason? Is something poison in it, or?
I can't even remember where I heard it. That's usually.
They're starting to make cadmium free paints now, I know, because of the danger supposedly of cadmium. I don't know how true that is, but like everything else, you know,
The other thing was quinacridine gold, somebody told me is
Oh, really?
around anymore either.
Wow. Well, I know one thing, all my paintings are gluten-free, so. I've often thought of making, when I do outdoor shows, make a little sign like that, you know, all paintings gluten-free. Get a laugh anyway. Okay. What I want to do now is start working on the background. I'm going to come back and do more stuff here, but not right this minute. Now what I want to do is clean a little area on my palette here. And I'm going to take, this is kind of the biggest brush I have. It's a white sable, one of those Robert Simmons white sables. And as you can see, the point is gone and all, but it's good for covering a lot of ground when you want to put a lot of paint on. A lot of people use flat brushes. I for some reason don't like to use them. I don't know, for whatever reason. So I use all round brushes. Anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that Horizon Blue, and it's semi-opaque, you know, just like cerulean blue is semi-opaque. It has some white in it. That's the only way you can get a blue like this in watercolor. So I'm adding a lot of water to it, and I'm going to leave the surface dry. I'm just going to paint a lot of this blue right on the dry paper. And you got to use a lot for whatever reason. It doesn't cover a lot. I use a lot of water, a lot of paint.
Okay.
of paper is that?
It's, like I said earlier, it's a Dick Blick brand, and it's a block, watercolor block. It's a little bit slicker than Arches, even though it's cold press. It's got a bit of slickness to it. That it's not as slick as a hot press, but it does have a bit of.
Is that your favorite paper?
It is so far. You know, if I find something tomorrow, you know, that I like better, I don't know. I used Arches for many, many years. Then I started trying different other papers. And I was using Kilimanjaro for quite a while, Cheap Joe's. That's a good paper, nothing wrong with that.
It seems to move really well.
It's what?
The paint seems to move really well in that paper.
Yeah, like I said, it's got a little slickness to it, so it doesn't drag a lot. You know, like Arches has. Sometimes they make the Arches with too much sizing in it, and it winds up you have to take that sizing off before anything will move properly. Okay, so that's going to be the base for my sky. Now what I'm going to do is take some ultramarine and mix it with some of the horizon. A little bit of opera. And while it's still wet, I'm going to put in some darker blue. This will be the part of the sky without clouds. That first blue is going to wind up being clouds. And while it's still wet like this, you can play around with it. You can make nice shapes, and it'll stay nice and soft. It's a little hard to see. You got to lift it up because it gets a shine on the paper and you can't see what you're doing. All right, that looks pretty halfway decent. Let's see. Let's dry it up a bit. What's the old cliche? So boring, it's like watching paint dry. Okay. Now what I want to do is I want to put in, before I do that, maybe I'll do a little bit more work on the building here. I want to put another shadow, I think, on the roof, on this piece of roof. sort of an orangey, purpley red. And we'll make believe there's another, I probably will put some vegetation there. I got a little bit of the blue on the roof there, so instead of fooling around with it, I'm just gonna put a shadow over it. And here again, I'm gonna just use the brush to make, hopefully, some Caribbean-looking vegetation shadows here. Put a little line here again for the edge of the roof. As you can see, it got a little lighter than when I first put it in. Another line here, I think. Okay. And now I'm going to go back into where my closed window is, and wherever the shadow hits that blue, I'm going to darken that because the blue is darker than the white in sunlight. So the shadow of the blue in shadow has to be darker. All right. Good. All right. Let's see what else we're going to do here now. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to put in either another island back there, or piece of the island that comes around here. I'm going to save this for water. So now it's just a matter of determining how far up I want to go. I don't want to go too far up. Maybe right around here somewhere. I did a little sketch the other day, and I don't know if you can see it. Similar to what I'm doing today. It's, I just did it real quick. I think maybe I'll have the island come down this way though instead. Do it a little differently. So what I'm going to do, I want to show a little bit of atmospheric, some atmosphere going on. In other words, this is going to be further away, so I'm going to put a little a little blue in with the green. Now I'm going to use my green again here, but I'm going to make sure I put in some blue with it, and hopefully that will give you the impression that the landmass, whatever it is back there, is a little further away. Now, as I come down, I'm going to start leaving some areas I'm going to leave some areas of that original blue that I put down, or the sky that's there. And those are going to be little houses up on the mountains. Now, I'm just going to make a lot of them now, and then I can take some of them out. So these are just going to be little squiggles of lighter value. If you've ever been to any of the Caribbean islands, you know that they always have a lot of buildings up on these hilly areas. A little bit too much of the blue. Get back to the green there. And I'm making it a little darker as it comes down the mountain, because theoretically that would be a little closer to the foreground here. There's a little too many buildings here. And when it comes down to the area that's closer to the water, you'll always have more buildings down closer to the water. And we'll get a little darker there too also. Boy, it's a quiet group. I'm going to add a few little darks here and there just to show some of the say little valleys and whatever on the distant landmass there. Okay, now the important thing is to get this straight. Now I'm going to put in the water. Now the water generally reflects the sky, but darker. So I look at my sky and I see that I have to go quite a bit darker with my water. Now I'm going to mix the two blues together again. Whoop, that's a little too much, I think. Well, maybe not. So spread it out a bit. And a little bit of green here. That's going to be the shallow part. You know, the Caribbean, they always have that emerald green in the shallow part. You know where that is? Well, in the deeper parts, it's just reflecting the sky, so you get the blue cast to it. In the shallow areas, you got the sand underneath, right? You've got the sand, which is basically yellow, blue and yellow, green. That's how it works. Okay, now I just have to let this dry up a bit, and then we're going to put some darker bushes in here and there, and start to make things pop out a little bit better. See, that water dried up a lot lighter, so I'm going to have to wind up making it darker anyway. I'm going to add a little of the raw Umber Violet in there just to give it a little bit more of a gray. If I had time, I could paint around some sailboats in there and stuff like that, but it gets to be tedious watching stuff like that. Just get a little bit of that blue in here. Okay. Now this area of green right here, I think needs a little bit more oomph. So I'm going to green it up again and maybe put a little yellow in there. Okay. And this is kind of dry now, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put in a few more pieces of island vegetation. Just make sure I get it dry. Okay, let's go. A little darker, I need that darker. What was that? Okay, now I can use a few more little touches here and there of darker green. That's a little too dark. A little lighter. Just to have this green vegetation kind of stand out a little bit. Get a few more dark notes in here. Bring some of these leaves out in here. Touch up a few of these areas here that need a little bit more definition. Darken that up a bit. Okay, let's see, where's my yellow brush? And, oh, I want to put the shutters on. Again, I'm going to go into that horizon blue. And we'll put a couple shutters on. Here's my little window pane brush I have.
Have you visited the Caribbean a lot?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you
Go to the
said.
Caribbean a lot?
I've been to lots of islands. My wife is a travel nut and takes me all over. I'm at the point now where I don't want to go anywhere. We've been on 25 cruises, which were mostly fun because I would go with my brother and sister-in-law and my niece and my kids, and so we had a good time. But now I'm at the age where it's like, just let me sit. Let me sit and paint. I'm good with that.
You don't paint on plein air?
No,
Would you take your camera?
too uncomfortable. Most of the stuff I do now, I just make it up. I've been doing this stuff for so long that I don't. This is all made up, really. I mean, it's based. I have photographs of stuff like this, but I put a little here, a little there. Take from here, take from there, and I didn't use anything to draw this. I just made it up. Okay, it's been doing it so long. I've done. I can't tell you how many thousands of paintings, and you get to a point where you don't have to really look at anything. I'll put some louvres here on the shutter. I started doing perspective drawings for a kitchen company in Bayonne, where I used to live, when I was 14 years old. These guys opened up a kitchen business, didn't know how to do perspective drawings. This is way before computers. And they could do the floor plans, and my father was a contractor, used to deal with the place, and, oh, my kid could do that. So he sends me down there. I had to take the bus down. I wasn't even driving yet. And after school, and they gave me a book how to do perspective. I figured it out, and I did thousands of those I worked through college, doing these drawings. When they didn't have any drawings for me to do, I would deliver lumber, or deliver kitchen cabinets, or I was the cleanup man when they did a kitchen job. So I've done so many thousands of drawings and paintings and stuff that I don't have to really look at anything. Okay, let me get back to my shadows here. I always like to throw a bit of shadow across the bottom of a painting. It makes a nice threshold when you're looking at the painting. And I'm going to bring some of these shadows back onto the grass here too. Just going to tighten up a few of these things here. And let's see, darken there. And I'm just going to put a little bit more, little darker value in the distant area here. course, got my hand in it. It's tough trying to work without moving the piece around. All right, let me just finish up a few little details here and there, and then probably should be over. We okay on time? Another thing I want to do is I want to put a window in here. Just a little dark area there. Just going to tighten up some of these little areas that I got a little sloppy in. Detail on the vegetation here. One thing I want to do also is I want to darken the shutters wherever, again, the shadow hits the shutters. Okay, let's see, what else? Let's tighten this up a little bit. Darken that up. Cut that light out there. Get this a little darker here. And a little dry brush on the wall. On the pavement here, it's usually gravel, something like that. Oops. And then, let's see, what else can we do here? Let's put in,
You're done.
yeah. It's an old trick that it moves everything back a little bit. It gives you a little bit better perspective. I should probably put a little bit more on there. Kind of stuff the old illustrators used to do when they used to do the ads for the Caribbean cruises back in the 50s. Okay, and I just put some more little darks in here just to show a little more detail down here at the port side here. I'm going to dry it up. Okay, now, I always like to finish the show by putting it in a frame for you, so bear with me a minute or two.
Can I ask you a question while you're doing that?
Of course.
Yeah. If you didn't want to buy that Horizon Blue, could you kind of take like ultramarine or something else and mix a little, white gouache with it and get anything similar?
I don't know, you could try it. I don't know. I've never tried doing that. I think if you put white in with ultramarine, you wind up with mush. I don't think it would work. It might work with like phthalo or something like that, something that's more of a dye color, but I don't know. That's something you'd have to find out on your own.
Paper on a block, why did you mess it?
Say again?
You're using paper on a block, why did you mess it?
Using it on the block, and then what did you say after that?
Why did you put masking tape on it?
Why did you put masking tape on it?
You'll see in a minute. I always do the tape because at some point of the painting, I like to take the tape off and see what I have. It's almost like, it's like putting a mat over it, really. Because when you have the tape on, everything looks, kind of crummy. So it looks better with a nice clean edge. Oh, I can always do that. Can you see it? Okay. Thank you.